The story begins with the destruction of Ragnar's castle, known as Rose Palace. The palace's people, servants, guards, and knights, are being killed one by unknown assailants. Despite his efforts, the protagonist, Theo Ragnar, struggles to stand against one of the attackers. He swings his sword, forcing his opponent back, but just manages to block a strike in time. The Ragnar clan is a grand ducal family responsible for guarding the empire's northern borders. Their power comes from a unique constitution believed to be inherited from dragons. For over 1,000 years, the Ragnar clan has served as the empire's great northern wall. Every member of the Ragnar bloodline is born with extraordinary magic, stamina, and swordsmanship, everyone except Theo. Despite his lineage, Theo lacks the talents that define his family. In the midst of battle, Theo is stabbed in the stomach and falls to his knees. His opponent taunts him, claiming Theo will never achieve greatness due to his lack of talent. The man then removes his mask, revealing himself as Rana, someone Theo knows. Shocked, Theo demands to know why Rana has betrayed him. Rana, unfazed, mocks Theo, calling his efforts to improve laughable and labeling him the perfect imbecile of Ragnar. Anger surges through Theo as he demands to know if Rana became his sword instructor just to betray him. In response, Rana slashes Theo's arm, causing him immense pain. Rana tells Theo everything happening is his fault, blaming him for the destruction of Rose Palace and the death of his family. As Theo grieves over his mother's corpse, Rana cruelly reminds him that this is all due to his weakness. In a desperate act of fury, Theo grabs a sword and attempts to strike Rana, but before he can, another sword pierces his chest, leaving him bleeding on the ground. Rana's accomplice scolds him for taking too long, but Rana dismisses the remark, saying he was simply reminiscing. As Theo lies dying, he reflects on his regrets, feeling he failed to protect his family and achieve anything. Suddenly, a system message appears, declaring that Theo has died and is returning to a regression point. Confused, Theo opens his eyes and finds himself face to face with Rana once more, as if no time has passed. Disoriented, Theo wonders if what he experienced was real or just a dream. A system message then appears, giving Theo his first quest: punch Rana in the face. Shocked, Theo wonders if this is truly a dream, but deciding to go along with it, he punches Rana. Though it doesn't hurt Rana, Theo is surprised by how real everything feels. After Rana hits him back, Theo is left pondering whether this is a dream or reality. As the story progresses, Theo is ridiculed by nearby knights for his actions. He realizes that he has somehow returned to his 17-year-old self, 10 years in the past, before a significant event known as the Awakening Ceremony. A system message congratulates him for completing his first quest and informs him that his Ragnar talent has been activated. Later, Rana, Theo's swordsmanship tutor, reports to Lady Cecilia Ragnar, Theo's mother, about his progress. While Cecilia believes in Theo, Rana secretly sabotages his growth and feeds information to a mysterious benefactor. Despite this, Theo feels an immense joy at being able to see his mother alive again, knowing he must change the future and exact revenge on Rana. The system then presents Theo with his second quest: train your body to the limit. Determined, Theo begins his journey to grow stronger, preparing himself for the inevitable war for the throne. Although he had been assigned to the information team due to his lack of skills, he never anticipated that the data he collected back then would turn out to be so valuable now, particularly regarding a potent elixir known as the Bloody Sword Emperor's Elixir. Its true worth would only be uncovered in the future through a secret manual, and Theo realizes that, when paired with rigorous training, it could be the key to his strength. Hours pass, and as dawn breaks, Theo continues to run without resting, feeling strong and believing that everything is possible due to his activated Ragnar talent and the system window, which indicates that he has made 27% progress toward his 100% goal. One of the knights training nearby notices Theo and inquires how many laps he has completed without a break, commenting that Theo appears significantly fitter than before. Grabbing a nearby wooden sword, Theo resolves to push himself harder, deciding to run as far as he can and swing the sword more than ever before. Only then can he truly gain power. During this training session, the system updates his progress to 65% of his goal. A few days later, Theo is still on the training ground, relentlessly swinging his sword without any rest. Evelyn Narville, the manager of Training Ground Number 4, sits at the top, yawning while holding a cigar. She observes that Theo has been training nonstop for several days and begins to question whether he is genuinely the imbecile of Ragnar, as people claim. As she watches him, she starts to doubt that someone so dedicated could truly be talentless. Meanwhile, Theo is utterly exhausted, barely catching his breath and feeling as if he is about to collapse. However, when the system displays that he has reached 97% completion, he forces himself to continue, pushing his body to its limits. He recalls the previous night when, after reaching 90% progress, he had taken a brief rest, only to be shocked when the percentage dropped. He hadn't expected the system to penalize him for taking a break, which drove him to keep moving until morning. Despite his disbelief, the system had compelled him to continue until he could hardly breathe. Hours later, as he hits 98%, Theo runs forward with the wooden sword, swinging it with all his might, knowing he is almost there. He accelerates around the training ground as he approaches 99%, summoning every last bit of strength and convincing himself that he just needs a bit more. Evelyn watches in disbelief, her mouth agape, as Theo pushes through his pain and fatigue. Finally, he reaches 100%. The moment the number appears, he halts, losing his balance from overwhelming fatigue. The system congratulates him on completing tutorial quest number 2, displaying his rewards and bonuses, but his vision is too blurred to make them out. He collapses to the ground, trembling as the system asks if he wants to claim his rewards now. Not seeing clearly, Theo reaches out with a shaking hand and manages to click yes. As soon as he does, he passes out while a brilliant light envelopes him, and a powerful gust of air surrounds him, shocking Evelyn, who witnesses the event. Later, Theo wakes up and sits upright upon realizing he is in a room. Evelyn enters and reassures him, explaining that he is in the break room of Training Ground Number 4. She adds that even a Ragnar would collapse if they pushed themselves as hard as he did. He recognizes her, which surprises Evelyn, though she formally introduces herself. She explains that he lost consciousness while training alone in the morning, so she moved him there to recover. Theo thanks her, understanding the situation. Evelyn hands him a glass of water, and then asks if he knows that within the Ragnar clan, opening one's mana hall before the awakening ceremony is strictly forbidden. Still confused, Theo replies affirmatively. Evelyn presses further, explaining that he should also be aware of the consequences of breaking that rule. Puzzled, Theo asks why she suddenly brings this up. Evelyn's tone grows serious as she reveals that just before he lost consciousness, a mana wave occurred that aligned with the opening of a mana hall. Taken aback, Theo wonders if he may have opened his mana hall, with Evelyn addressing him as young Mr. Theo Ragnar. Theo is left wondering what she means, knowing that if he had opened his mana hall, he should not have survived. But then he senses something within him and recalls the system notification indicating he obtained a dragon heart as a reward. He also remembers that as a bonus for quickly completing the quest, he received magical power equivalent to 10 years of his past life. Stunned and in disbelief, Theo struggles to comprehend that he now possesses a dragon heart. A mana can be placed within a dragon's heart, allowing it to operate much more efficiently. However, humans, not being dragons, place their mana halls in the lower abdomen since the human heart cannot withstand the burden. This is why every warrior, particularly those in the Ragnar clan, longs for a dragon's heart, as it is seen as a shortcut to immense power. However, humans have never been able to surpass their natural limitations until now. With the dragon heart granted to Theo, he finds himself in a precarious situation. Theo realizes that Evelyn Narville is no ordinary person. She is a high-rank swordsman who retired after losing her left arm and now manages Training Ground Number 4. Previously, She served as the commanding officer of the White Armored Dragon Cavalry, so respected that even the demon dragon of the cavalry adored her. She was renowned for her principles, not caring about status or strength, and could not tolerate dishonesty or cowardice. Theo recalls that in his previous life, when he had been obstinate, Evelyn relinquished her position as his direct mentor. In other words, if Evelyn discovers the truth about his dragon heart and the mana hall within it, she would report him for execution without hesitation. However, Theo smirks, pondering whether he could outsmart her without getting caught. In a calm but serious tone, Theo asks Evelyn if she can handle the consequences of accusing him, a Ragnar, of breaking such a grave rule based solely on her suspicions. Her momentary feelings could lead to his execution, but her principles might also entrap her. Stunned, Evelyn listens as Theo reminds her that if she is wrong and accuses him without proof, it would mean tarnishing the Ragnar name. She agrees, and when he earnestly asks what the punishment for such a crime would be, she replies, execution. Theo praises her knowledge of the rules and provocatively suggests that she check for herself. Evelyn, feeling unnerved, studies his expression, uncertain about what she is feeling. Could Theo really be that kind of person? She releases her power, convinced there was a mana wave, and angrily prepares to check his abdomen, believing that there could be no exceptions to the rules. But when she looks, there is no mana there. Confused, she begins to wonder if she might have been mistaken. Still, the possibility seems impossible to her. Theo, noticing her confusion, casually asked if something was wrong. Realizing her mistake, Evelyn immediately knelt before him, pleading for him to execute her as punishment for her wrongful accusation. She admitted her error and offered her life as payment for her sin. However, Theo smiled, knowing there could be no visible mana because dragon hearts were different. A dragon heart's mana hall could be controlled and hidden at will by its user, and since humans possessing a dragon heart wouldn't be known for several years, Evelyn had no way of suspecting the truth. Instead of punishing her, Theo reached out, tapping her on the shoulder, telling her such actions weren't necessary. This shocked Evelyn. As Theo turned to leave, he calmly stated that she had only done what she believed was right, acknowledging her bravery in confronting an heir of Ragnar. He recognized her strength and decided it was in his interest to erase her debt to him. Theo then explained that opening one's mana hall before the ceremony was forbidden due to the risk of it overflowing. Amused, he remarked that she had been worried about him, the so-called bastard of Ragnar, overflowing his mana hall. He thanked her for her concern, leaving her stunned, the cigar still unlit in her mouth, as Theo exited the training ground. As he left, Theo reflected on his dragon heart and the 10 years' worth of magic power from his past life that the system had provided. He was now certain he could become overwhelmingly powerful in this life. A few days later, Rena yelled at Theo, telling him his sword swing was off and needed adjusting to the right. Growing frustrated, Rena asked how many times he had to repeat himself. Theo found it tiresome pretending to be weak while enduring Rena's lessons, which were clearly flawed. In his mind, Theo cursed Rena, realizing he was deliberately teaching him incorrect techniques. As Rena tried to adjust his grip, Theo grew more certain that someone was manipulating Rena's actions. An idea suddenly struck Theo, and he smiled, confident that he could handle the situation. He called out to Rena, who snapped back, reminding Theo that talking during lessons was prohibited. Before Rena could finish his reprimand, Theo snapped the wooden sword in his hands and calmly said he couldn't continue because the lesson was pointless. Angry, Theo questioned how Rena had even become a mid-rank swordsman with such poor skills, suspecting that Rena's real purpose was to keep an eye on him. Theo mockingly suggested that Rena would struggle against low-rank, demonic beasts. Visibly enraged, Rena demanded that Theo repeat himself, but Theo doubled down, declaring that Rena's skills were garbage. Theo considered his options, deciding the best course was to force Rena to resign. Furious, Rena sarcastically called Theo young master, but Theo remained calm, believing that if things escalated, Rena would have to report to whoever was pulling the strings. Later, at Camellia Palace, a knight excitedly informed someone named Axion about the upcoming duel between the bastard of Ragnar and his instructor. Axion, unimpressed, hurled his glass at the knight, knocking him out. Axion Ragnar, one of the four hounds of the north, scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as insignificant. However, another figure warned Axion that even the smallest threat should be taken seriously. Ed Trone, the nine-dragon sky dragon, advised that the situation could change if they weren't careful, but Axion brushed off his uncle's concerns, claiming only truly talented individuals were worth worrying about. A week later, at Training Ground 4, knights gathered to witness the duel between Theo and Renah. Theo stood on the stage with a real sword, cursing under his breath. His original plan had been to humiliate Renah and have him fired. Theo's teacher graciously allowed him to make the first move, which Theo took without hesitation. As their swords clashed, the audience of knights quickly grew tense, murmuring in disbelief as Brendan launched a series of precise attacks. Theo, however, struggled to keep up, leading the crowd to jeer and mock him, labeling him an imbecile who couldn't handle a sword properly. They even speculated that at this rate, Theo might die. Despite the ridicule, Theo remained focused, blocking Renah's strikes. Renah taunted Theo, reminding him that he was just an apprentice, while Brendan was a mid-rank swordsman, the type Theo had once looked down upon. Although Theo's skills had recently improved, Brendan was confident the outcome was already decided. In his eyes, Theo, the imbecile of Ragnar, was no match for him. However, Theo recalled a conversation with Evelyn earlier, where she had told him that simply firing Renah wouldn't solve the problem, as Renah likely had powerful backers. She had secretly investigated Renah after noticing his strange teaching methods, uncovering connections to Camellia Palace, which infuriated Theo as it seemed tied to the throne's political struggles. Although Evelyn believed Theo could defeat Brendan, Theo wasn't so sure of his strength yet. Back in the duel, Brendan arrogantly told Theo to beg for mercy, but Theo blocked his powerful strike with ease, leaving Brendan increasingly uneasy. The audience gasped in surprise as Theo's skills seemed to surpass their expectations. Brendan, bewildered by Theo's sudden improvement, began to wonder if he had been underestimating him all along. As the fight continued, Theo's strength only grew more evident, pushing Brendan back. In a pivotal moment, Theo demanded to know who was backing Brendan, shaking his opponent. Brendan swung furiously in response, but Theo calmly parried and suggested that Camellia Palace was involved, hitting the mark. Brendan froze in shock. In a flash, Theo made his decisive move, severing Brendan's arm with a single strike. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Brendan collapsed, screaming in pain. Though wounded, Renah hurled insults at Theo, but Theo confidently approached, reflecting on how much he had grown. He reminded Renah of their previous encounter, now turning the tables by blaming Renah for his downfall. In one final motion, Theo beheaded Renah, completing his revenge. The system congratulated Theo on completing his third tutorial quest and offered him a bonus reward, which he accepted. As the audience murmured in disbelief, Theo couldn't help but marvel at how things had changed. He, once an apprentice, had defeated a mid-tier swordsman. The system also awarded him a year's worth of magic power, leaving him both astonished and curious about his newfound ability, observation. Lost in thought, Theo didn't notice a new figure crashing onto the stage, leaving him in shock. As the dust cleared, Theo looked back in horror to see none other than Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon and commander of the white-armored dragon cavalry. Panic flooded Theo's mind as he realized who Julius was and wondered how long he had been watching. The knights in the audience were equally stunned. They shouted in awe, recognizing Julius as one of the 9 dragons, the commander of the white-armored dragon cavalry. Meanwhile, Evelyn, more frustrated than surprised, muttered about how her commander had completely destroyed the floor and wished he could enter more normally. Theo, now face to face with one of the strongest men on the continent, felt his panic rise as Julius approached. Theo froze in terror, especially when he saw the fierce glare in Julius's eyes. However, Julius suddenly broke into a loud, booming laugh, catching Theo off guard. With a soft pat on Theo's back, Julius complimented him, saying the duel had been exciting and impressive, confusing Theo even further. Julius continued, expressing his surprise at Theo's abilities. He asked if the student had truly surpassed the master, then realized it might be a bit disrespectful since Theo had killed Renan. Still, Julius shrugged it off, remarking that a man like Renan likely deserved it. Laughing, Julius dismissed the thought and, with enthusiasm, grabbed Theo by the shoulder, offering him a position in the white-armored dragon cavalry. Theo was shocked by the offer, while Evelyn smiled knowingly from the sidelines. The knights were in disbelief. They couldn't fathom how the imbecile of Ragnar had been scouted into the elite white-armored cavalry. Despite Theo's victory, they didn't think it warranted such an honor. Remington, standing nearby, turned to a fellow knight, asking if there had ever been a case where an apprentice swordsman, especially one who hadn't even undergone the awakening ceremony, had been scouted. After a moment's thought, the man replied that he had never heard of such a case. Remington agreed, certain it was unprecedented, as it was impossible to gauge someone's true potential while their mana hall remained closed. Even if their swordsmanship was excellent, they could lack magic power, which made it risky to recruit them. Remington couldn't understand how even someone like Julius could see such potential in Theo. To everyone's shock, Theo declined Julius's offer. He stared at Julius seriously, causing the commander to fall silent, speechless. Remington, Evelyn, and all the knights watching were equally confused, unable to comprehend why Theo had rejected such an opportunity. The entire training ground fell into stunned silence as they stared at the two figures on stage. In the days that followed, gossip about Theo Ragnar spread rapidly. People were stunned by the news that the so-called imbecile had killed his own master. Many concluded that Renan must have been weak for such an event to happen. What shocked people even more was that Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon himself, had tried to recruit Theo into the white-armored dragon cavalry after witnessing the duel, only for Theo to decline because he felt his skills weren't yet enough. Word quickly spread that Theo was a humble Ragnar, a rare quality that left many surprised. Meanwhile, at Kamia Palace, Emil Ragnar, the Lady of Chia and Mother of Action, expressed her frustration, saying that things had become complicated and she couldn't believe Theo had killed Renan. Her brother calmly reassured her, reminding her that Renan had been assigned to Theo specifically because of his poor skills. Emil agreed, stating that the death of someone like Renan wasn't important to them. However, her real concern was that Julius, the demon dragon, had personally reached out to Theo, and to make matters worse, Evelyn had apparently ordered it. This meant they could no longer interfere by assigning Theo a new master. Emil explained that if Theo started standing out, it would become much harder for them to take control of Rose's palace. At that moment, the door to her room opened, and Action entered, asking what she meant by standing out. He confidently told his mother not to worry, assuring her that the clan hadn't taken interest in Theo, so their plan could proceed as usual. Emil asked Action if he understood that the best way to take control of Rose Palace without offending the clan leader was for Theo to remain powerless. Action reassured her, saying that Theo was still powerless and that there was no way someone like him could have changed much. He also reminded them that Evelyn and Julius had always been drawn to underdogs. Ed, however, sternly cautioned Action not to make any rash decisions. Ignoring the warning, Action reached for the table and declared that since his mother and uncle were so concerned, he'd play with Theo a little and remind him of his place. The next day, at the training ground after their session, Evelyn praised Theo for his progress. He thanked her, remarking on how much better it was to learn from a proper master like her. Evelyn responded that it would have been even better if he had joined the white-armored dragon cavalry, and she asked him why he had declined the offer. Theo admitted to himself that he did have some regrets about turning down the cavalry, especially since it had been his dream in his past life. However, joining now would limit him too early. He thought about the privileges that would come to the top performer of the awakening ceremony, something that far surpassed joining the cavalry. He told Evelyn that he didn't want special privileges and still felt he wasn't ready, but he was satisfied with her training for the ceremony. Evelyn accepted his answer and mentioned that Commander Julius would likely be disappointed. Curious about Evelyn, Theo activated his observation ability. He saw that she was 24 years old, held the title of former deputy commander of the White Armored Dragon Cavalry, and was a high-ranked swordsman. Her current status showed that she admired his humility and character, felt energized from teaching him, and missed the cavalry. Theo smiled, realizing how useful his observation ability was, and he felt pleased to discover that Evelyn was genuinely happy to teach him. Suddenly, a young man approached, excusing himself and introducing himself respectfully as Sybil Drya from the Southern Inspection Post. He explained that he needed to discuss something with Theo. Confused, Theo noticed that Sybil looked intimidating, so he activated his observation skill again. The system revealed that Sybil Drya was 17 years old, held the title of Dunce of the Southern Inspection Post, and was also an apprentice swordsman. Sybil's rank was loyalty, and his status showed a strong admiration for Theo and a desire to spar with him, which left Theo shocked. He couldn't believe that someone with such a serious expression was eager to spar with him. At that moment, the system displayed that Theo's final tutorial quest had begun, to discard the title Imbecile of Ragnar with a completion goal of 100%. It also showed that he had already reached 28%. Sybil then admitted that he wished to follow Theo, acknowledging that he had ignored him in the past. He also believed the title Ragnar's Imbecile suited Theo perfectly, which made Theo angry as he instinctively lifted his sword. But before Theo could react further, Sybil sincerely explained that he had observed Theo coming out every morning to train harder than anyone else, and that the result of such effort was Theo's miraculous growth, something Sybil had seen firsthand. Recalling Theo's defeat of Renan and his recruitment by the demon dragon Julius Ragnar, Sybil declared that Theo had become his idol. Sybil confessed that after being called the idiot of the Southern Inspection Post, he had nearly given up on himself, but seeing Theo gave him hope. Bowing deeply, with his sword raised above his head, Sybil begged Theo for the opportunity to clash swords with him. Normally, Theo would have doubted Sybil's true intentions, but after using his observation ability, he confirmed that Sybil was genuine. This was unexpected, but Theo realized that after taking down Renan and the rumors of Julius's attention spreading, people driven by an inferiority complex would likely challenge him. What he didn't expect, however, was that some would actually want to follow him instead. He guessed that, at the very least, the pride of the Ragnar bloodline still held sway among people like Sybil. Theo understood that eventually he would need followers of his own if he were to become the head of the Ragnar clan. His fourth and final tutorial quest, to discard the title Imbecile of Ragnar, was directly tied to this. Theo knew this was a title he had never been able to shake in his previous life, but this time, with new opportunities, he was determined to completely rid himself of it. Turning to Evelyn, Theo asked if they could have a moment. Evelyn, with a proud smile, agreed and encouraged him to show off his skills. Raising his sword, Theo formally introduced himself as Theo Ragnar, apprentice swordsman of Rose Palace, awaiting the awakening ceremony, and proudly named Evelyn Narville as his master. Evelyn beamed at this. In response, Sybil introduced himself as Sybil Drya, apprentice swordsman of the Southern Inspection Post and a practitioner of the Cure clan swordsmanship, specializing in the quick sword. After the formal introductions, Theo suggested they have a good spar. Sybil immediately sprang forward, launching his sword at Theo. Theo easily blocked the attack, and Sybil noted how fast Theo was, despite being known as the idiot of the Southern Inspection Post. Sybil was still confident in his speed. He continued to swing at Theo, recognizing that his opponent's skills were indeed the real deal. Theo, blocking each of Sybil's slashes with ease, thought back to how, in his previous life, he would have struggled to fend off even a few strikes. With a powerful swing, Theo raised his sword and sent Sybil flying, effortlessly overpowering him. Sybil spat out in pain as he slammed into the floor, but instead of frustration, he smiled happily. He praised Theo, acknowledging that he had lost to his young master, and thanked him for the opportunity, saying he had learned a lot from the spar. Theo raised his sword again, signaling that the duel was over, and told Sybil it was a good fight. Theo noticed his reflection in his shining sword and wondered if he could use his observation skill on himself. Curiosity piqued, he activated the skill. To his surprise, it worked, displaying a screen that read, "Observing Theo Ragnar." He was taken aback by the details it showed. His title was still Imbecile of Ragnar, and his talents included Player Ragnar, Observation, and 4 locked talents labeled as Denied Access. His status indicated a strong yearning for the awakening ceremony. His level was 1, with the following stats: Strength, 13 Dexterity, 14 Vitality, 12 Magic Power, 190 Intelligence, 11 and Luck, -49. The system popped up, explaining that his stats were now perceivable, and all stats would be represented by numbers going forward. Theo noted his talents being categorized, and he wondered if completing more quests would unlock the 4 hidden abilities. He was pleased to see that he could personally check his stat values, especially noticing that his magic power was high, thanks to his past life's magic and the dragon art. However, the negative luck stat puzzled him. He wondered if it meant he had been cursed, and if all the bad luck from his previous life had stemmed from this. Deactivating his observation skill, Theo thought to himself that he needed to find a way to increase his luck. Just then, he heard people approaching from behind and turned to see several men watching him. Evelyn observed that, although Sybil had been weak, he was still a mid-rank swordsman, and the fact that Theo had defeated him and received the approval of Julius meant that, in Ragnar's rule of the strong society, people would either envy him or admire him. The group gathered behind Theo seemed to fall into the latter category. The knights had been shocked by Theo and Sybil's duel, confirming that the rumors were true. They wondered if they themselves could have blocked Theo's strikes had they been in Sybil's place. Among them was Alan, who wanted to spar with Theo but, unsure how to ask, stood silently. Theo used his observation ability on him and learned that Alan was 19 years old, held the title pillar of a Nan Viscount, and was a low-rank swordsman. His talent was passion and perseverance, and his current status revealed a strong desire to spar with Theo. With a sigh, Theo called out to Alan, surprising him. Alan stammered, asking if Theo knew him, but Theo simply ordered him to come forward and suggested they spar. Alan, excited, raised his sword and eagerly replied that it would be an honor. He introduced himself as the 3rd son of Viscount Nan, trained in the swordsmanship style known as Double Ascension. Theo introduced himself in return as Theo Ragnar of Rose Palace, expressing hope that they would have a good fight. Both rushed at each other, their swords clashing in the middle, causing Theo's basic swordsmanship proficiency to increase. Alan quickly pulled his sword back, gaining momentum, and swung it forcefully toward Theo. Theo's side nearly landed a strike on his neck. However, Theo blocked it just in time, pushing Al's sword away, and his changing heart's swordsmanship proficiency increased as well. Al, stunned by Theo's skill, admitted defeat, stammering as he acknowledged his loss. The system informed Theo that he had gained Alan's approval, and that his luck increased by 1 point. This left Theo wondering if gaining people's approval could improve his luck, and if it also tracked his reputation. Additionally, the system showed that he had earned experience points. Theo slashed his sword forward, engaging with the next knight who wanted to fight him. Knowing he needed to keep pushing himself, he continued to defeat his opponents one by one. After each victory, he earned their approval. Bennett Romo's approval increased his luck by 1, followed by Eric Morin, who also granted him an additional point of luck. He continued to battle, gaining the approval of Manfred Burr, Manuel Noir, Vero Perrin, and Daniel Rand, each victory adding another point to his luck. After defeating several knights, Theo took a moment to catch his breath. He asked who would be next, but when no one stepped forward, he opened his status window. Despite having fought so many, his quest progress had only increased by 1%. Confused, he wondered if it was because these knights already respected him to some extent. He began to suspect that, in order to make significant progress, he needed to challenge stronger foes or prove himself in front of those who still looked down on him. A different kind of event was required. Suddenly, a voice from behind remarked on how exhausted he seemed and asked if he would be all right. Theo responded that he'd rest when necessary, but for now, He didn't need it. The man stepped forward, revealing himself as Remington Ario, one of the 4 hounds of the North, who then requested a spar with Theo. Theo was shocked. Remington was a member of the prestigious 4 Hounds of the North, which included Hulkus Lank, Ray Ragnar, Action Ragnar of Camellia Palace, and Remington himself. These were the strongest warriors of the Ragnar clan's awakening ceremony generation. Remington introduced himself and explained that he had come early to see Theo's swordsmanship before the awakening ceremony. Curious, Theo activated his observation skill and saw that Remington was 17 years old, held the title of Deputy Clan Head of Nario, and was also known as the Silver Lion, one of the 4 Hounds of the North. His talents were listed as sword genius, keen senses, and extremely hard worker. His current status revealed that he was surprised to see a rival he hadn't expected. Raising his sword, Remington thanked Theo for fulfilling his wish, expressing his desire to test his skills. Theo raised his own sword and introduced himself as the 31st son of the great guardian of the North, Kyle Ragnar, and an apprentice swordsman preparing for the awakening ceremony. Smiling, Theo felt honored. He never imagined he would meet and fight the legendary sword genius Remington, someone he had admired for a long time. While his quest was still ongoing, the thrill of fighting Remington was all that mattered to him at that moment. Theo humbly told Remington that it was an honor to cross swords with the famed Deputy Clan Head of Nario. Remington, in turn, expressed his excitement for the upcoming battle. As they both took their stances, Theo wondered if his current abilities were enough to defeat someone as formidable as Remington, one of the 4 Hounds of the North. Their swords clashed, sending a loud metallic sound reverberating through the area as their battle began. The system showed that Theo's tutorial quest progress had increased by 1%. Due to the strong clash of their swords, one of them shattered into pieces, completely destroyed. Evelyn observed calmly, but the knights were stunned. Half of the broken sword fell to the ground. It was Theo's. The spectators couldn't believe that their young master had seemingly lost. Sybil, in disbelief, shouted that it couldn't be true, but Manuel pointed out that it was an obvious result, no matter how much Theo had improved. It was impossible for him to defeat one of the 4 Hounds, the strongest warriors of their generation. Still, Sybil praised Theo's fighting spirit. The knights were even more surprised when Remington admitted that it was his loss. He thanked Theo for the good duel, explaining that his sword had already been worn out, and he was exhausted, which meant the duel was his defeat. However, Theo responded that on a battlefield, no one would offer such considerations, and admitted that he had lost the moment he lost his sword. Remington smiled at Theo, and they shook hands. Remington expressed his hope for a proper duel next time, and Theo agreed, hoping for the same. Manuel was shocked to see that Theo had been acknowledged by one of the 4 Hounds, while Sybil proudly shouted to Manuel that their young master Theo was different. Even Evelyn sighed in relief, and the system informed Theo that his quest progress had increased to 35%. Theo looked at Remington, acknowledging his strength. He understood that while he had gained incredible power from talents and secret manuals through the system, Remington's skill was still far beyond his. The moment their swords clashed, Theo realized that he still had much to improve. Though disappointed that the duel ended prematurely, Theo felt he had gained a lot. Not only had his luck increased by 10 points, but his reputation had also improved significantly. However, he was still dissatisfied with his quest progress, which hadn't moved as much as he'd hoped. He began thinking about what stage or event might help him gain more approval. Remington then called out to him, explaining that he hadn't come just to duel. Handing Theo an envelope, Remington invited him to join the Scaled Dragon Society. Sybil was shocked, knowing that the Scaled Dragon Society was a prestigious group exclusive to those who had been specially selected. He couldn't believe that Remington had personally invited Theo. Theo, equally surprised, questioned whether someone like him was suited to join such a famous group. Remington dismissed Theo's doubts, saying that he was more than qualified. He explained that the Scaled Dragon Society wasn't as serious as it sounded. It was simply a social group for peers preparing for the upcoming awakening ceremony. Curious, Sybil asked why Theo was being invited, while Bennett, overwhelmed, looked ready to cry. Theo wasn't sure of Remington's motives for the invitation, but he knew that the Scaled Dragon Society was centered around action and filled with people who looked down on him. He realized this would be the perfect environment to progress his quest and gather information on Action and Camellia Palace. There was no reason to refuse. Accepting the invitation, Theo thanked Remington and confirmed that he would participate. The knights were amazed that Theo had been invited to the Scaled Dragon Society, and the system informed him that his quest progress had increased by 1%. Remington shook Theo's hand, pleased with his decision, and told him that if he had any questions, he shouldn't hesitate to ask. Remington then mentioned that the next meeting would be in 2 weeks. Evelyn, lighting her cigar, watched them silently, deep in thought. A moment later, at Rose Palace, Cecilia barged into Theo's room, calling out to him. Surprised, he told her he was just about to deliver some news, but he was left speechless when several maids followed her inside. Stammering, he asked his mother what was going on. Cecilia excitedly explained that she had heard about his invitation to the Scaled Dragon Society. She went on to explain that the society included Action, the son of the cunning Amal, as well as brilliant talents like Remington. The maids began assessing which colors suited him best, while Cecilia explained that the Scaled Dragon Society garnered attention from the council. Everything about him, from how he dressed to how he composed himself, would be scrutinized. As Cecilia measured his shoulders, she reassured him that while his etiquette would be flawless, his attire and demeanor were matters she could help with. She reminded him that she used to be an actress, so this was something she knew well, and she was more than happy to assist him. Theo knew he was often labeled the illegitimate child of a commoner concubine, and his mother had always felt guilty about it, even though it wasn't her fault. In the cold Ragnar clan, he could only imagine how hard it must have been for her, especially with a son who was often seen as lacking. Cecilia then hugged him tightly, calling him her son, and told him she believed in him, that she knew he could succeed. Theo smiled, touched by her words, and hugged her back, assuring her there was no need to worry anymore. The room was filled with emotion, and everyone present was moved by the moment. Cecilia, with pride, declared that her son was joining the Scaled Dragon Society. 2 weeks later, on the night of the Scaled Dragon Society banquet, Remington stood outside Rose Palace waiting. He was taken aback when Theo walked out, dressed impeccably, with Cecilia and the servants wishing him good luck. Theo smiled at Remington, but Remington, still in awe, asked if it was really him, commenting on how different he looked. Theo laughed, telling Remington to stop teasing, but Remington insisted he was being genuine and pointed toward the carriage. As they got into the carriage, Theo reflected on Remington's words. He did feel different. He had grown taller, his muscles had become more defined, and 2 weeks of diligent training had clearly paid off. During that time, Remington had visited him daily, and they had grown closer. Not to mention, Theo had also gained new followers. Evelyn had sighed many times during the 2 weeks, saying she only intended to teach him for a short while, but somehow got pulled into a more involved process. Theo, in turn, simply looked away, knowing how exhausting the past weeks had been, especially with Remington's daily presence, which made Evelyn hit her head in frustration more than once. As the carriage rattled along, Remington asked if this would be Theo's first formal banquet, to which Theo replied it was. Remington reassured him, saying there was no need to be nervous. He knew Theo would do well. However, he also warned Theo about his friend Action, which left Theo confused. Remington explained that Action could be very mischievous, but in fact, it was Action who had extended the invitation, not Remington. Action had expressed a desire to meet Theo, and had gone so far as to prepare the banquet in his honor. Remington hoped Theo wouldn't think too harshly of Action. Theo, now understanding that it was Action who had invited him, smiled, thinking things were going a bit too well. He replied that he was looking forward to it, fully expecting the evening to come with its share of insults and challenges. Meanwhile, at Camellia Palace, Action held a glass of alcohol, excitedly anticipating the arrival of what he saw as a new toy, Theo, the imbecile of Ragnar. A moment later, the carriage stopped, and the driver informed them that they had arrived. Remington stepped down first, followed by Theo, who looked up to see they had reached Camellia Palace, the place that had once instigated Renard to interfere with his growth and ultimately consumed his mother and the entirety of Rose Palace. Remington asked if they should head inside, and Theo responded affirmatively. As they walked, Remington mentioned that Action would personally greet him at the entrance, a rare gesture. However, Theo's mind was elsewhere. He knew Action was likely trying to halt his rise, but Theo had come prepared, determined to make Action realize who he was really dealing with. Suddenly, a blue light reflected off his earrings. When he looked up, Theo noticed the glow of the quest in one of the rooms, making him wonder if there was a quest hidden within Camellia Palace. Before he could investigate further, Remington called out his name in alarm, rushing toward him as something fell from above. A loud explosion followed, leaving a cloud of dust. Shocked, Remington called out again, but Theo emerged from the dust, replying that he was fine. It had only been a sack of flour. Remington, furious, looked up and demanded to know what the culprits were doing. Theo brushed the flour off his clothes, knowing that in his past life, he wouldn't have been able to dodge and would have been covered in the powder. He glanced at Remington, suspecting for a moment that he might have been in on the prank, but after checking Remington's status using observation, Theo saw genuine confusion and realized Remington had no part in it. Looking up, Theo knew the flower stunt had been Action's doing. Sure enough, Action appeared and asked what Theo thought of his greeting, claiming it was simply a friendly welcome, basic courtesy between peers. Remington angrily demanded an explanation, but Action brushed it off, asking if Remington was actually upset and suggesting he should just take it as a playful greeting between brothers. Theo activated his observation skill on Action and immediately saw the titled Dark Tiger, an apprentice swordsman with talents such as madness and psychopath, highlighting an overwhelming proficiency in swordsmanship. His current status revealed he was excited, viewing Theo as a new toy to play with. Smiling, Theo thanked Action, surprising him. When Action asked what he meant, Theo brightly explained that Action's warm welcome naturally made him feel grateful, and he was looking forward to the party. Action, taken aback at first, quickly recovered and commented that it had been a while since he had so much fun. A moment later, they entered the grand party room, where murmurs and whispers filled the air. The guests were confused about Action's intentions. Many questioned why someone from the direct line, like Action, would invite Theo, the so-called imbecile, to the prestigious Scaled Dragon Society. Yet, as they observed Theo, they admitted he seemed more composed than expected. Theo walked through the room with Remington, sipping wine, while the other guests continued whispering, wondering if Action was planning to toy with Theo again. Remington, feeling embarrassed, apologized to Theo once more, explaining that they usually weren't this hostile. Theo reassured him, saying he was fine and, in fact, grateful for the attention, leaving Remington confused. Theo smiled inwardly, thinking that all the gossip and insults were necessary. He needed them to talk behind his back, because the more they did, the sweeter his victory would be when he crushed them later. As Theo continued scanning the room, he noticed the source of the blue light, the quest marker he had seen from outside, was located on the second floor. He was certain it was linked to a quest, but for now, he had no natural way to approach it without drawing attention. Deep in thought, he sipped his wine, but Action soon interrupted, asking if he was enjoying the party. Reminding himself to stay calm and follow through with his plan, Theo smiled and responded that he was indeed enjoying it, thanking Action again for the invitation. Action, feigning apology, admitted that he might have gone overboard earlier. Placing a hand on Theo's shoulder, he creepily asked if Theo would accept his apology. Before Theo could respond, Remington angrily called out to Action, but Theo surprised everyone by saying there was no need for an apology. He only remembered a friendly greeting. Action, taken aback for a moment, laughed and slapped Theo on the back, declaring how fun Theo had become, adding that he had no idea Theo was like this. Action then spoke loudly enough for the guests to hear, commenting that Theo had changed a lot from how he used to be, and that he liked him more and more. The guests laughed, teasing that Theo was just smiling and acting like Action's lapdog. One man commented that an illegitimate child like Theo, with no real roots, could never stand up to the noble blood of the Throne family. Another guest agreed, saying that despite both being Ragnars, Theo and Action were on completely different levels. How could someone like Theo, born of a random woman, ever compare to the noble swordsmanship lineage of the Throne clan? Despite hearing all the whispers, Theo remained calm, smiling outwardly while holding back his anger. The guests then shifted their gossip to Remington, wondering why he was so close to Theo. One of them remarked that if they looked into it, Remington was also illegitimate. This shocked Remington and left the room in an uncomfortable silence. The man who had spoken suddenly realized he had crossed a line, as Remington's illegitimacy was a forbidden topic. Sensing Remington's sadness and growing more furious, Theo decided to act. He called out to Action, asking if he should introduce himself to his new friends. Walking over to the table, he grabbed a bottle of wine and approached the man who had insulted Remington. Sensing something was off, the man stuttered, asking if he had said something wrong. Without warning, Theo swung the bottle, smashing it over the man's head, stunning both Action and Remington. The man screamed in pain, clutching his bleeding head and calling Theo a bastard, but Theo responded with a swift kick to the man's head, knocking him to the ground. Calmly, Theo asked what the man meant by bastard, remarking that he had merely given him a friendly greeting, and using such a hurtful word was unnecessary. The other guests panicked, whispering in disbelief, questioning whether Theo was truly the imbecile they had assumed. As this unfolded, Theo's tutorial quest progress jumped to 43%. Remington, shocked, realized this wasn't a Theo he knew and wondered if Theo was acting for his sake. Meanwhile, Theo stood over the fallen man and with a cold smile stated that he had extended his welcome. Stepping on the man's arm, he asked if it was time for him to say his goodbyes. Gripping his arm tightly, the man pleaded for Theo to wait, but with a swift motion, Theo snapped the man's arm, the bone breaking audibly. Everyone in the room stood frozen in shock and disbelief as Theo's quest progress surged to 59%. As the man collapsed in agony, Theo released his grip and casually asked if anyone else wanted to say hello. His quest progress increased again, now reaching 66%. At that moment, guards emerged from hiding, surrounding Theo and drawing their swords, aiming them at his head. They shouted that harming their young master would be paid for with death. Theo wasn't surprised. He knew the man he had just beaten was Ian Hanvey, the third young master of the Hanvey clan, one of the 6 snow clans that supported Ragnar. But this was exactly why he had come to the Scaled Dragon Society, knowing it was filled with enemies. Theo addressed the guards calmly, telling them that he knew the Hanvey clan's position and expected that they wouldn't stand idly by while the imbecile they had always looked down on suddenly started fighting back. But he no longer planned to tolerate their disrespect. Theo then asked the guards, "So what if Ian is the young master of the Hanvey clans?" His words left the knights stunned. He followed up with a sharp question, asking if the dogs of a Ragnar Bannerman clan dared to demand his death, and if they were prepared to take responsibility for such words. The knights stood frozen in fear, wondering what kind of pressure they were feeling, and if this could really be the imbecile of Ragnar they thought they knew. One of the knights suddenly realized the gravity of the situation. Theo, as a direct descendant of Ragnar, held the right of succession. Ragnar was the Lord of the North, ruling over the 6 snow clans. Declaring death upon a bloodline of the Dragon Lord was a sin so severe that the destruction of an entire clan wouldn't even be considered unreasonable. The knight understood that, while this hadn't applied to Theo for a long time, it did now, and they would need to apologize immediately. But before they could act, Theo gave an order to kill them.